At 6:30 am on Tuesday the 29th of November 2022, the police were called to attend the junction of Braggs Farm Lane and Lady Lane in Solihull after two members of the public on their way to work found a man in a pool of blood. As the emergency services reached the scene along a country lane near Earlswood Lakes reservoir at roughly 6:45 am, they found a 44-year-old man lying face down in the road, who appeared to have suffered a stab wound. Sadly, despite the best efforts of the West Midlands Ambulance Service, nothing could be done to save him, and the man was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. The man murdered near Earlswood Lakes Reservoir was identified as 44-year-old Muhammad Istar, a taxi driver and a father of 5 from Cape Hill. This sparked a murder inquiry, with investigators understanding that Muhammad had earlier that morning driven a fare from Birmingham city centre to the Solihull area. Thankfully, the investigation received a substantial breakthrough in the case, when an 18-year-old man attended Solihull police station voluntarily with his father on the night after the murder and gave an account of the incident, and was subsequently arrested on suspicion of murder and held in custody. After this development, police named a teenager wanted in connection with the fatal stabbing of Birmingham father of 5 Muhammad Istar. A major police hunt was launched for Oliver Pugh, suspected by the West Midlands Force to have been involved in the death of Muhammad Istar. A spokesperson for the force said, "We're trying to trace this man in connection with the murder of taxi driver Muhammad Istar in Solihull this week. We suspect Oliver Pugh is involved in the death of the 44-year-old who was found fatally stabbed at the junction of Braggs Farm Lane and Lady Lane on Tuesday morning, November 29th. We really need to hear from anyone who has information on the whereabouts of the 19-year-old so we can trace and question him." On Friday the 2nd of December, the 18-year-old man who was arrested on suspicion of murder was identified as Luca Di Fazio from Solihull and was charged with the murder. Mr. Istar's devastated family paid tribute to him in a statement released via the police, which read, "Our daddy, our hero. Our hard-working father has been taken so quickly from us. He was our world. He was so loved, respected by the whole of our community. He leaves behind his grieving wife, his 5 children who he loved deeply, his elderly mother, his 3 sisters, his 1 brother and fur babies. Our martyr will live on and has set an example for his children. He will never be forgotten. See you on the other side, Daddy." Detective Inspector Michelle Thurgood from Force CID added, "Our thoughts are with the family of Mr. Istar at this tragic time, and our investigation teams are focused on establishing exactly what's happened. 1 person has been arrested, and we are continuing with door-to-door inquiries as well as CCTV trawls and forensic investigations at several locations as we build a full picture of events. We have already spoken with a number of people who are in the area or live nearby and urge anyone who hasn't yet been in touch to contact us." Over the weekend, the investigation continued with its inquiries, as well as CCTV and forensic investigations at several locations. The murder manhunt for wanted Oliver Pugh proceeded, as a police team was seen in Dickens Heath while they searched a balancing pond on a new build estate, as a probe into the killing of Muhammad Istar continued. 1 week on from the murder, on the day of the funeral of Muhammad Istar, Oliver Pugh was found hiding out in a caravan in the Cresswell area of Derbyshire and was arrested on suspicion of murder. He was immediately transferred back to the West Midlands, where he was taken into custody for questioning. Muhammad's death sent shockwaves through the community who held him in great esteem. Prayers were said at Smethwick Jamia Masjid on Windmill Lane at 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday the 6th of December 2022, where his friend, Khalid Muhammad, who had known him for 30 years, said, "He was a very nice person. He was cheerful, happy, and always had a smile on his face. He loved his taxis. He had been doing it for a long time. He used to eat at a restaurant on Dudley Road with his taxi friends. This is a big loss. All his friends used to call him Rambo as his nickname. He got along with everyone, and his family are heartbroken." On Monday the 12th of June 2023, Luca Di Fazio and Oliver Pugh stood trial at Birmingham Crown Court, accused of murdering 44-year-old Muhammad Istar. The pair both denied murder, blaming the crime on one another, while Oliver also pleaded not guilty to possession of a blade. The court heard how on the evening of the murder, Luca and Oliver had been at Rosie's nightclub on Broad Street in Birmingham city centre. In the nightclub, Oliver struck up a conversation with a girl he had never met before, who would prove to be a key witness in the case. As they left the nightclub together, they moved on to Dixie Chicken, when Oliver asked her if she was a snitch. After she replied no, Oliver foreshadowed his brutal murder when he bragged to her that they were going to rob a taxi. She assumed that he wasn't being serious and laughed the remark off before they eventually went their separate ways. Oliver and Luca were picked up by a taxi from Birmingham city centre and told him to drive to Bragg's Farm Lane in Solihull. The prosecution claimed that they had intentionally lured Muhammad there on the pretense that they would collect his fare from a nearby caravan, but it was to ensure that the incident would happen in a remote location. As they returned, it's claimed that the pair returned armed with knives, and despite Muhammad's best efforts to defend himself, one of them stabbed Muhammad through the heart before stealing his Vauxhall insignia. During police interviews, both defendants denied any involvement in Muhammad's death, and they blamed each other. According to Luca, he stayed at the taxi to vape while Oliver went to the caravan alone to collect the money, but returned holding 2 knives. He then pushed one of the knives through Muhammad's chest while saying, "Take it," to which Luca said that he tried to talk Oliver out of it, saying that he was a good taxi driver and they should leave him. He alleged that they got back into the taxi, with Oliver in the front seat where he started waving his knife around, at which Muhammad got out of the taxi and started fleeing. He alleged that Oliver then ran after Muhammad, and recalled hearing him plead as he followed behind, "I have a family, I have kids, please don't hurt me," before he caught up and saw him hand Oliver the keys to the taxi, saying, "Take them," before Oliver stabbed him once more. He claimed they left in Muhammad's taxi, but at one point he had to get out and push after Oliver crashed it into a bush about 25 seconds after fleeing Bragg's Farm Lane. Luca said that it was at this stage when he dropped the knife Oliver had given him earlier. He said Oliver later sent him social media posts saying someone had died, which is when he called his dad and decided to go to the police. Luca told officers he felt he had no control over his own actions that night because he was intimidated by Oliver, who fled to the Cresswell area of Derbyshire after the incident. However, Oliver claimed that it was Luca who grabbed 2 knives from the vehicle and sprinted back to the taxi. He alleged Luca chased Muhammad, then came back and handed him one of the knives. He accepted that they drove off in the victim's Vauxhall insignia, but said he had not found out that Muhammad had died until a few days after the incident. He denied stabbing Muhammad, and told officers he had only gone to Derbyshire to see a friend, and that he was intending to go to the police voluntarily himself. Muhammad suffered defensive wounds to his left arm and right finger, and he was also stabbed in his right thigh and his chest, with the blade piercing his heart. After the initial attack, a jury was shown CCTV that captured Muhammad running away from Oliver on Bragg's Farm Lane, with Luca following some distance behind, before returning back into view minutes later without him. The prosecution said that what had happened that led to the defendants turning back so quickly only they know, but it was likely that they caught up with Muhammad. It is likely in those few seconds of CCTV where Muhammad is seen that he had already been attacked, and he had either suffered a leg wound or the heart wound or both. He was bleeding so extensively that he left a trail of blood. The court heard 2 men found the victim in the street as they were driving along Bragg's Farm Lane later that morning. They came across his body, which was lying face down in the road, and they stopped their car and went to see what could be done. Initially he had no sign of obvious injury, but then they noticed there was blood on the road, and after lifting up his t-shirt it appeared that he had been stabbed. The prosecution stated that as they drove away leaving Muhammad for dead, the pair went about covering their tracks by discarding the weapons and throwing an item, believed to be Muhammad's phone, out from the car. Once they drove the stolen taxi to Oliver's house, the pair removed the taxi badges and number plates from the vehicle before stealing a replacement license plate that same morning. Oliver then drove off in the taxi and crashed it through a hedge into a field at Malpit Close, where it was later recovered by police. When Muhammad's body was discovered by the police, Oliver's passport was found in his pocket. Oliver was tracked down and found to be hiding in a caravan in Derbyshire, where he was arrested on suspicion of murder. Later that day, Luca handed himself into Solihull police station, and told officers his account of what had happened. On the night of the murder, it was found that Oliver Pugh had attacked several other men during the same evening in unprovoked attacks. The prosecution stated that Oliver was intent on causing harm on that night in November, which ultimately ended in tragedy. Oliver's stepdad, Byron Holliday, sparked a police investigation at the beginning of the proceedings after he foolishly took a picture of a juror at the trial. The trial at Birmingham Crown Court was subsequently halted for 3 days as the police questioned his actions, with this setback costing £30,000 of public money. This was set off after a female juror submitted a note to the court raising concerns after she alleged that Byron had taken a photograph of her as she stood in the queue outside court waiting to go in. Police officers later quizzed him and found the image in the deleted files section of his phone. Byron was summoned into court to provide an explanation, where Judge Simon Drew KC warned him that if he was found to have acted in contempt or court, he could be fined, imprisoned or both. He gave him the opportunity to seek legal advice, but Byron opted to deal with the matter there and then instead. The 46-year-old from Solihull took to the witness box and confirmed his identity and his relation to the defendant. He said, "I have been giving a running commentary back home, and I was talking on my phone. Absent-mindedly, I was saying I was going in. I said I could see the jurors coming up, so it was time to go in. As I did it, I realised it was a silly thing to do and deleted it. That was it. I'm so sorry. It was just a stupid moment. I didn't realise the severity of my actions. I'm sorry for wasting your time and everyone else's time in the room." Byron further described his actions as idiotic. Judge Drew accepted the explanation and took no further action against him. He told him, "It was a foolish act on your behalf and without thinking of the consequences, rather than anything done to do any mischief as far as this case is concerned. I do not need to spell it out to you. What you have done is a very serious matter. I could have dealt with you for contempt, found you in contempt, and imposed a short sentence of imprisonment." Judge Drew did, however, discharge the jury and reselected a new panel, with the case having to be opened for a second time in a matter of days. He added, "These courts have to ensure the trial process is particularly protected, and in particular jurors feel safe to come in and out of court. The juror who spotted you was right, and you can understand how anxious she would have been. These days, people press send of a photograph long before they engage their minds as to the consequences of their actions. The consequences of what you have done are that I have had to adjourn the case and discharge the jury. 3 days of court time have been taken up and used. It costs £10,000 a day to run a courtroom." The judge did not order Byron to pay any cost and permitted him to attend the rest of the trial, but warned everybody would be keeping an eye on him. Despite his not guilty plea, the jury found Oliver Pugh guilty of murdering Muhammad Istar on the 29th of November 2022. Luca Di Fazio had already admitted possession of a bladed article at an earlier hearing, for which he was instantly sentenced to 1 month in prison. Luca's account of the horrifying crime was accepted by the jury, who found him not guilty of murder, and taking into consideration he had been in custody since November, he had already served the punishment and was immediately released from court. This decision prompted angry scenes as a number of people left the public gallery of the courtroom, with members of the victim's family heard questioning the decision to release him as they left. Recalling the facts of the case, Judge Simon Drew KC, when passing the sentence on to Oliver, said, "It is perfectly clear from what subsequently happened you were intent on causing trouble that evening. You engaged in repeated acts of unprovoked violence. By the time you got into Mr. Istar's taxi and directed him to Bragg's Farm Lane, I have no doubts you intended to rob this vulnerable public servant at knife point." Michelle Healy, KC, defending, argued that Oliver's true intention on the night was to avoid paying the taxi fare. She argued Oliver did not have the intention to kill and acted impulsively, recklessly, and was using a knife without thinking. Miss Healy told the court that Pugh has ADHD, which caused him to act impulsively, as well as the fact the murder took place a few months after the last coronavirus lockdown, which she stated particularly impacted young people. She added, "He is filled with regret. Every night he has to live with and sleep with the consequences of his own actions. But the judge said, anyone who stabs someone in the chest with a large knife, as you did, can have no other intent other than to kill. Furthermore, when he managed to escape from a taxi and from you and run off down the road, you hunted him down, you caught up with him, and despite the fact he was bleeding down the road, you delivered at least one more serious stab wound. When he collapsed and fell, you offered no support. Never did you seek any help. Instead, you took his car and his car keys and headed off away from the scene as fast as you could. In doing so, at one point you drove through a hedge and into a field, so desperate were you to get away. Reading an emotional statement in court after the verdict, Muhammad's daughter, 26-year-old Miriam Hijab, told how her father had worked all of his life in a bid to save, to build a dream home for his family. She said, "Our lives will never be the same again. We are not living, we are existing, passing time day by day, minute by minute, until we are reunited with the love of our life again. We barely saw him without his uniform. He spent most of his life working, saving and saving. He built his dream home for us. He was so selfless." His daughter told the court that her father came to the country at age 13 and worked as a factory worker as well as a taxi driver. Finally, she added, "Why did he have to pick these two idiots up? Why did it have to be our father? He didn't deserve this at all." She then called for changes in the law and called for greater education on the impact of carrying a knife. "Even now, after what has happened to Dad, I get scared of walking to work thinking, is there someone around me with a knife here? They need to have youth workers out talking to these children. There needs to be education in school about knife crime. People, when they are doing it, they don't see the impact it might have on the family, so that is what needs to be taught." Muhammad's eldest son, 22-year-old Arslan Ali, added that his dad was a very good example of what a father should be. He said, "I don't know how someone can do such an evil thing to a poor innocent man. People don't understand that when they use a knife, they are not only ruining their own life by going to jail for such a long time, they are also ruining their family's life, their brother, siblings, and whoever their loved ones are. And also the people they attack. What they had done to my father affected so many people. My little brother is 12. He is such a young kid, and he has to grow up without a dad now. My siblings, they don't get to have that laugh and good times and spend that time with my dad anymore because of a knife." Following the verdict, Detective Inspector Michelle Thurgood from the homicide team said, "This was a horrific attack on a father who was out working that night to provide for his family. Earlier that evening, Pugh had also assaulted other men for no apparent reason. He was clearly intent on causing harm to others that night. Our thoughts remain with Mr. Istakar's family, and I hope this sentence can bring them some closure." On Friday the 22nd of September 2023, Oliver Pugh was sentenced to life imprisonment at Birmingham Crown Court for the unprovoked stabbing of Muhammad Istar, to serve a minimum term of at least 27 years. He appeared disgruntled by the length of his sentence, repeating the term and shaking his head as he was led out of the dock. As he was being escorted out by a detention officer, a member of the public gallery shouted at him, calling him a murderer. After hearing this, Oliver snapped back at the member of the public gallery, where he threatened to punch them as he was dragged out of court to begin his 27-year-long sentence. No motive for the killing was ever discovered. And that brings to a close the horrific case of Muhammad Istar, who was tragically taken away from his loving family and friends at just 44 years old. Lawless Underground would wish to extend its sincere condolences to the loved ones of Muhammad Istar. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to Lawless Underground for more crime-related content. If you have any suggestions or requests for future videos, then please let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, and goodbye for now from Lawless Underground.